Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 230, We, Be, and I Live by the Quaffing. Now, this is a fascinating poem on a number of counts. We are back to the intoxications of poem 214, I drink, I taste a liquor never brewed. This poem was actually published in the Atlantic Monthly February of 1929. So think about how interesting that is, that this is one of those poems that the Atlantic saw as being truly remarkable. And I think it is. I think it's a remarkable poem. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm very hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm very hopeful that you've already read through the preceding 229 poems. We just finished with 229, A Burdick Clawed My Gown. Here, we're back to Emily and her identification with a bee. And they are both drinking companions, which is going to make this a lot of fun. And in some ways, Emily will seem to be arguing that life is, in fact, drinking. Now, I find this a remarkable poem because there is a violent image in this poem that is deeply disturbing. And Emily just seems to kind of throw it off as if it's not that big of a deal. And so we're going to ask ourselves about that. Some see this as Emily, certainly Ruth Miller has said it this way, that here Emily is drunk, but not on any kind of ale, but rather on, as Ruth Miller calls it, poetic genius. That is to say, her Emily's capacities as poet. I actually read this poem as a possible another theodicy. Go back to our intro set of lectures. The theodicy question, why must there be pain and suffering in this world? And to what degree has life its ale, as she will argue in this poem? Let's enjoy it. We, Bee and I, live by the quaffing. 'Tisn't all hock with us. Life has its ale. But it's many a lay of the dim burgundy we chant for cheer when the wines fail. Do we get drunk? Ask the jolly clovers. Do we beat our wife? I never wed. B pledges his in minute flagons, dainty as the tress on her deft head. While runs the Rhine, he and I revel, first at the vat and latest at the vine. Noon our last cup, found dead of nectar by a humming coroner in a by time. Now, this is a remarkable poem, and Emily's doing so much, and I can understand why in 1929 the editors at The Atlantic went, okay, this is kind of genius of another level entirely. Notice, first of all, she will identify with the bee, taking us back to poem 211, and of course, we're thinking as well about poem 214, I taste the liquor never brewed. We, Bee and I, live by the quaffing. By the way, quaffing only gets used one time, the gulping, the quaffing, the drinking. One time in all of poetry, and it's here. 'Tisn't all hock with us. Life has its ale. Now, the word ale gets used one and only one time in all of Emily's poetry, and it will be right here. It is an amazing line, life has its ale. And I think in some ways this is Emily's answer to the theodicy question. Why must there be pain? Why must there be suffering in this world? She says, no, life has its joy, life has its ale. But she'll amend it, and here the theodicy obviously steps in. It's many a lay of the dim burgundy we chant for cheer when the wines fail. In other words, when the ale is poor, that is to say life is suffering, we chant, we could argue here, poems about the best wine. In other words, I'm always looking. You remember in our conversations we had the talks with Walt, as we call them, our readings through all of the poems of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, the Deathbed Edition. You can find that at learnstrong.net. You'll remember that I pointed out several times that Walt said, I want to keep on the sunny side of life. And I think certainly Emily is trying to do the same here. Then she asks about this drinking. Do we get drunk? Now, when we hit poem 1466, she'll play one more time with this idea of getting drunk. One of the ones that Midas touched who failed to touch us all was that confiding prodigal, the reeling Oriole. So drunk he disavows it with bandage divine. So dazzling we mistake him for an alienating mind. Now, this idea of being drunk, come back to it. Do we get drunk? In other words, okay, so there's one thing to drink but to be drunk. Now, obviously, we're thinking about Tennyson's Ulysses, little prophets that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags matched with an aged wife. I meet and dole unequal laws into a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed, and know not me. I've become so old that my life is of nothing. I cannot rest from travels. You'll remember he says, I will drink life to the lees. And here we're playing a similar game. How much of life do we drink? Do we get drunk? Ask the jolly clovers, right? I mean, in other words, ask what bees will enjoy drinking. And then the rhetorical, bizarre question, do we beat our wife? This is a disturbing image, and many have found it to be out of place. But I think here, the point that she's making is, do we act beyond what we should when we get drunk? And notice she says, I never wed. Now, it's not that she's disavowing beating wives, it's just she says, I never wed to have the opportunity. So again, there are some who are disturbed by this. I think she's being ironic here. In other words, yes, I get drunk, but I always show a certain level of restraint. I always make sure that I don't overact when I am celebrating life, and some would argue the way she loves poetry and the expression of poetry. B pledges his, you'll remember this word pledges from poem 46, in minute flagons, dainty as the tress on her deft head. And again, Emily loves these words like dainty, you'll remember small in 77 poems, little in 172 poems. She likes the idea and the referencing to being dainty. While runs the Rhine, go back to poem 123 for the reference there. He and I revel, this idea of reveling, to enjoy life. First at the vat and latest at the vine. And I like the vat and the vine referencing here because many have read this idea of the vine as being somehow related to, of course, her poetry and the art. Noon, our last cup. And the idea of vine and then last cup will obviously give us some sense of Christ, right? And the last cup, and of course the Last Supper. Found dead of nectar, notice in quotation marks, and here obviously we're being ironic. The bee killed by, of course, drinking too much time. Emily killed, obviously, by time. Notice the difference, T-H-Y-M-E for the bee and T-I-M-E for Emily. Found dead of nectar by a humming coroner. This is interesting, a humming coroner. In other words, another bee, or of course the coroner, who is in fact working on the corpse, in a by time, that is to say, at some point in the future. The bee's going to drink so much that he just dies. I'm going to drink so much life that I will die. It's compelling imagery and our identification with the bee. Well, what's going on here at 2A? I think that the idea she's saying is that one should always be drunk on life, and yet not too drunk. Not so drunk to beat one's wife, if you will, right? That is to say that the best way to experience life is through art, through poetry, and of course experience. At 2B, well, the language here is extreme, especially the beating of wife reference. I'll let you decide how you want to read that. At 3, I mentioned poem 214, I mentioned Tennyson's Ulysses. How about Wordsworth's The Rainbow? I think the energy of that poem is available for us here as well. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. That kind of extremist position. We've given full lectures on Wordsworth's little ditty at learnstrong.net for those of you that like to run it to ground. Finally, to own a poem like this, how about this one? Do you believe that life has its ale? Do you believe that we should drink deep? You'll remember that Thoreau said, almost contemporary here, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. He says a few lines later, I wanted to suck out all the marrow of life. This idea of living life to its fullest. What are your thoughts on that? Do you believe? And then how do you show restraint so that you don't overdo it? It's a fascinating question. I think Emily spent her whole life trying to figure out how to play that game too. Thank you.